Have you ever known someone who had a symptom that became part of their identity? The woman in today's story had a cough that kind of became her signature. You could find her around the house or in a store because you could hear her coughing. So we're going to get into that. We're also going to talk about a woman who had vertigo and how that could be traced back to some tragic events in her life. We're going to talk about not just chiropractic in our physical bodies, but about the energy of it all. I'm Jenna Quentin, founder of Adjust Your Media and host of What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure, Stories of Innate podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes because there's lots of resources and good things for you there. Let's get started. Today's guest on What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure, Stories of Innate podcast is Dr. Lona Cook. She's a chiropractor in Wisconsin. She's also a speaker and an author and a coach, so there's just lots of fun stuff to dig into. So thanks for being here. Welcome.
Thanks, Jenna. We just were in the same place not too long ago, so it's always good to see you.
Yeah, we were in Nebraska at, Life West Omaha campus, so that is so fun. But then to connect here and to be able to share this conversation with other people is always such a fun thing. So thanks for taking time and talking to us today. So as always, I'm going to ask you to share a story. Tell us about somebody whose life improved with chiropractic care.
I'd love to. And we were just chatting offline quick. I said, well, what do you get more of, kids or adults? And so we decided I was going to share a few stories from our practice from some of the adults. And one of them I'm going to share is a woman that actually we did a write-up on her success with chiropractic just because it was kind of a unique complaint that she had that by addressing her imbalances in the spine, she healed. So she had what was a chronic cough, and she had probably some medical diagnosis as to why this phrenic nerve or like the nerve to her lungs was constantly stimulated, and she would cough just uncontrollably at times. And so it was to the point that her family for years knew where she was in the house, and in a store they could find her in the aisles based on listening for this cough that she had. So, she went about her day trying to be, in her normal life, but also she was a teacher. So obviously, being at the front of the classroom and having this scenario where she couldn't control this urge to cough was pretty disruptive to her life. And it was probably, I think, 2 months into care that her cough just went away. And it never came back. And what was pretty amazing is she's like, do you think it was the adjustments? I'm like, yeah, I think it was how subluxated the base of her neck had been for quite some time. And then after working on her, and it was interesting because right around that time it went away. And then something very stressful happened in her life right around like a month after the cough went away, and the cough came back for a little bit. And we could tell that when her nervous system was taxed again, physically, mentally, emotionally, etc., that body showed again that it needed more support and needed to be resilient again through a little more attention than we were giving it at that time. And so it was pretty amazing. Now she's years past that, and I still see her regularly, and she's doing great.
Yeah. Well, I love that. About how old was she? Like, what decade are we talking?
I would say in her 40s when she first started.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and like you said, as a teacher, we all have the things where we're like, oh, I'm going to do this a little bit less because of that. Even like when you think about when you have a sore throat and you tell the kids, I'm not reading out loud to you tonight, like I'm so hoarse or whatever. And it can really hold you back when you start limiting yourself by the things of, maybe not projecting her voice into the classroom as much, maybe not speaking with quite as much of the confidence and authority that she felt as a teacher because she knew like, I'm going to provoke a cough again. I think too, that it's interesting you said that this was an identifier for her. Mm-hmm. I think that that's something too that we see around us where we start to identify ourselves with an ailment, with a dysfunction, and I'm sure that you see that in your patients as well, that they start identifying with it.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that in relationship to her, but that's why I think chiropractic is so amazing, is because at a very base level, what I think is happening is that the energy is moving properly. As the spine is adjusted, that energetic system is more able to essentially like recalibrate itself, right? So all the layers of what affects us, both physical stuff that's happened over time and day-to-day stressors, but also things like you said, like, am I projecting my voice? Am I withholding my voice? Kind of get into like more Eastern philosophy of like how the chakra systems and the throat chakras, like, I believe that as that system is more balanced and the spine is supporting that nervous system, all of those layers are more integrated. And so identity and how we move our energy, I think all of that improves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that is such a beautiful way to integrate it, because I think sometimes we think about, oh, it's my body, but it's not me. I think you mentioned, more Eastern philosophy. It does depend where we grew up and what were our narratives around health and things. But when it's all integrated into our mind and our body and our spirit, it's all part of the same person.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think the body is your true north on some level, and it shows you things that we're meant to pay attention to. Like, I think our symptoms are actually very intelligent. It's our body's way of communicating. And I also believe that there's a lot more we don't understand about what all is attributing to like why a system or a body would process the way that it does. So, there's a field called epigenetics that's out there now that looks at the lineage of not only the genes, but also the environment that the genes are expressed in. And so, I think the good and the bad is the more that we look at how intelligent the system is, the more we recognize we have to learn how to trust our bodies, which also puts us back in the driver's seat of our own healthcare choices and how we look at ourselves, which sometimes is a hard thing to acknowledge for people that, I have choices here and maybe I didn't realize how much power I had in my own healing. Right?
Yes. Okay, that's an interesting point. And I'm not going to go off on the tangent too much, but I've had migraines since I was about 8 years old. And no 8-year-old should be having migraines. And through many things, trying to do things naturally, looking for answers, went through lots of different things, but trusting my body, being back in the driver's seat, makes me think about it's been about a year that I just have significantly fewer migraines. It's almost like they just disappeared. And when I was thinking about it lately, and people said, well, what changed? Like, you're still getting adjusted, you still try to eat well, but being in the driver's seat also meant that I, in an emotional way, needed to take responsibility for the fact, and I'd said for years, my migraines shut me down because otherwise I wouldn't rest. Mm-hmm. But actually saying, what if this is a part of me that says, you know what? You're flat on your back in a dark room, you can't do anything. What if I took ownership of that and in a more proactive way said, I'm going to rest before my brain and my body just completely shut me down?
Yes. And you've been doing that?
Yes. That's so amazing. It's been in part that, and I would say realizing you actually have to drink water, not talk about it.
Yeah, that's so good. Cheers.
You can't just carry an empty shaker bottle around. But you drink a few of those, and then I started taking amino acids, realizing that I have really undernourished my body for many years. Particularly amino acids is a very helpful thing to say, we're not going to replace what we're eating, but we've got to just have some extra. You've got to give it a little bit more. But that, trusting that my body could heal from migraines and putting me back in the driver's seat. And like you said, the stressful things, what is stressing me out? What did happen? What happened the year that I started getting migraines? I had never thought about that until last year, and I was like, oh, that was a stressful year in my family. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, you just gave me chills saying that. That's powerful, that question you just elicited, because we haven't been taught to listen, right? Our culture has not been taught to listen to our body. We've been taught to do everything but listen to our body for the most part. And that alone and that shift of just like, what if instead of my body working against me, it's actually working for me, is a massive change, because you start taking care of yourself in a different way then. There's so many stories like that. Like, when you just said that, I think of this woman that she actually became a chiropractor now, but she was a practice member first, and she was in her 20s. So she was young, and she had vertigo on and off since she was really, really little, like 10 or something like that. And, a 10-year-old doesn't usually have vertigo, right? Yeah. So as she had tried everything, right? And she's starting chiropractic and she's getting adjusted, but definitely like things are kind of like not holding. And I'm like, what else? And we just went back and I said, well, when did it first show up? Right. And she's like, my mom actually left the family and it showed up shortly after that. And I'm like, okay, well, if you get into the emotional root cause of vertigo, it's like everything's discombobulated, right? Your mind, your body,
Mm.
everything's spinning, right? And so, of course, as a child, if your mom left the family, that could be a pretty tumultuous time in your home
Yeah.
environment, whether consciously or unconsciously, right? And so that was just one of those things where I was like, it doesn't fix it, right? That's not the fix. It's just an awareness that also allows you to start asking yourself different questions. Oh, okay, like, is there almost part of me that's running still as a 10-year-old girl that's feeling discombobulated, right?
Yes. Yes. And that's a beautiful example because, you know, drawing the line between what if what is showing up, the symptom, the feeling, really is mirroring this outside experience. You mentioned the lady with the cough too, that it was when she was under some stress that the cough came back. You also said a phrase, I'd love for you to explain, like an adjustment not holding. What does that mean?
So every chiropractor has different analysis that we do, and based on the technique that we do it differently, but we have a way that we're able to see where you need an adjustment that day and if you need an adjustment in that area, right? So a pattern, if you will, of where your spine likely needs the care. And so in her case, or in many cases, like part of what we're looking at is like, when are you holding an adjustment? When do we need to adjust that again? Is there something that's changing in the degree that your subluxations are either holding or back in, the pattern that you came in with? And so that helps us figure out like what frequency that you need to be adjusted. If you're ready to go down to less often adjusting, is all based on like not only what you're telling us and what we're seeing clinically, but how well you're holding and changing with the adjustments.
Yes, beautiful. As I was looking up some things this morning, on your website, you talked about that your approach is beyond physical care and into energetics, which is kind of what we've been saying. But how does that look in your practice?
Sure. Yeah, so everybody comes in different headspaces, I think, about what they want help with. We say there's the science, art, and philosophy of chiropractic. And there's also like the science and the art and the philosophy around how we communicate it, right? And so one of the things that I think is a challenge for maybe newer docs especially is like learning how to recognize who's sitting in front of me and where are we going to be able to communicate and get into alignment so we can understand each other. So, when a new patient comes into our office, if they think, chiropractic might help them with their back pain, right? Then they're coming in with an expectation that maybe chiropractic is a fix for back pain, right? And so our job is to help them understand what we're really looking for, which is, if their body is subluxated and to what degree in the alignment of their spine and whatnot, and how that may be related to some of the things going on with them physically, as well as how they're processing life, right? The ability to be adaptable and resilient in their life. And I was actually just training with some chiropractors on this earlier. A lot of it is helping the patient see that we can do the adjustment, and that is a powerful thing. And they also have to actively be engaged in not only showing up for their appointments and getting on a chiropractic table, but also doing some of the work to change some of these things that are leading to them falling out of alignment or being subluxated to begin with. So the thoughts, the traumas, the toxins, we say that in chiropractic, thoughts being like, where's your thinking out of order, right? Like, where are you, like you gave us your personal story there, Jenna, like, where am I looking at my migraines? Like they're giving me a timeout when I could just give myself timeouts earlier and not have this fallout, right? Where could I learn to listen to my body? That's a change in thought, right? And I think for many people, that is one of the most underappreciated areas that we could help to, is just how they think about themselves and their bodies and listen. But then also like toxicity levels of things, like are they working in a factory, not drinking any water and exposed to a lot of things that their body's chemically having to detox from, as well as like, they say sitting is this new smoking and things like that, right? Like these micro traumas, these little things that are big things in the long run, because we live quite unnaturally when we think about us as animals, which is like something I'll say to patients, like you wouldn't do the things you do to yourself, to your dog, right? Like you wouldn't give your dog Diet Coke every day. You wouldn't, not take your dog for a walk. But we treat our bodies pretty terribly, I would say, as the average American. That's where we have to meet the person where they're at and start to walk on this journey with them, so that as they develop trust, and maybe they think it's just, about physically addressing their back pain. Oh, I'm going to get a physical adjustment to my sacrum, and that's going to be part of what helps me heal, right? And I'm not saying it's not. But I also, as we establish trust, sometimes get to go deeper with that person. We're like, well, what else could be connected here? So I remember this woman that came in the office, her back had gone out. We'd seen her for a while. So there was rapport there. And I said, okay, you were just here a couple weeks ago. What else is going on right now? She's like, oh, well, son moved in. He brought another person with him. I've got to feed 2 more people in my household. Like there was like this burden that had been placed on her, right? Well, when we get into looking at the body, like that lower back is your support and feeling like you either have to like support everyone else or you lack the support you need. And it wasn't a coincidence that all of a sudden her back goes out, right? So when that rapport is there, we can start to have those energetic connections too, where we're like, your body's showing you something here. And it's not just a bad L5 disc.
Beautiful. It feels like we're starting to understand that, and it's so good when you can explain it in those ways. My children frequently turn on Disney songs in the morning, so 6 a.m. with, Moana blasting. It's fine. But, one of the songs from Encanto is the oldest daughter who, is the strong one. And the song goes, pressure, like it drip, 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 and it never stops. And, when we start to understand that these things that we say, like, oh, I put my tension in my shoulders, it's real. It's actually happening. Even these phrases like butterflies in our stomach, it's not just phrases. We're actually feeling those things. Like you said, the word burden, like, oh, we understand then why it might translate, why and where it could translate in our bodies. And using that to beautifully communicate that with patients is so vital, because then even the thought of when we try to explain it to our friend, or you go home and try to explain it to your spouse and you're like, oh no, they gave me a good picture. They gave me a good story. So that you don't just go home all pumped up and excited about chiropractic care, but you're like, I don't know, she explained it good, but I just know I need to go. Like, you're really talking about explaining it in a lifestyle way that people can digest and grab hold of. So you also mentioned, though, that you share that with chiropractors and coach them through. So what are some of your favorite themes to coach chiropractors through on telling their stories, on communicating these things?
I think we have to give ourselves a little grace first, because we are chiropractic geeks, right? Like we love chiropractic and we love learning more. And there's an element sometimes where I think we want our patients to love it as much as we do and get so geeked out about the philosophy or like how it all is interconnected. It's so cool. And it is cool. And some people will geek out on it with you, and other people just love the benefits that it offers their life. And so I want people, other chiropractors I work with sometimes, to realize like it's your job to get masterful at communicating. It's your job to geek out on it and love the art or the science or the philosophy or all three, so that you can get better and better at communicating it because you've fallen in love with it and you've been around people who communicate it well, and eventually that becomes you too. And, our patients don't need to be able to like spell subluxation and, understand it to the same degree for them to still not love all the things that it offers their life. And I always think part of that is recognizing like I will go to a dentist for the rest of my life because I understand the benefits, right? Now I might not go to the same dentist always if there was something I didn't like about it, but right now I love my dentist, and she couldn't convince me otherwise unless there was something that happened within the setup that I really didn't enjoy, and then I would just find a different one, right? So I think that's part of it too, is like recognizing what's my job versus the patient's job here. And their job is to really get on the table and start to go deeper in their own understandings of their bodies and their family's bodies so that they can navigate it possibly differently than they ever thought of before. And our job is to keep getting better at how we can communicate it. So whether it's, the 50-year-old mechanic that comes in the office, or the 22-year-old new mom, or yesterday we had our oldest patient here, she's 101,
Awesome.
that you can speak the language to connect to the person, right? Because it's such a simple thing. It's almost so simple that it's hard to communicate.
Well, and I think that you do a great job You shared one time, like back in St. Louis a while ago, something about when patients are energetically ready. And I feel like you share a lot about, like you said, everybody having their own job and their own responsibilities. And what a release that is to be able to say, even the results, when they are energetically ready, when they're energetically in a place where they are ready to listen, that is their job, and your job is communicating it. But when someone is shut down, what can we do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, luckily, somewhere early on, I was exposed to really understand like who does the healing, right? It's I can only heal myself and you can only heal yourself, right? It's our connection to that which is bigger than us. And I'm not going to like split hairs on what we call it necessarily, but that energy that's tapped in, that's different from me than if I was a physical body, a cadaver on the floor, right? That source of life is missing when we see someone pass away, right? And so that understanding that God within is what heals the body is where, I don't want to take away what someone else is supposed to do for themselves, right? So I'm going to be a catalyst. The adjustment is a powerful reboot, and the asking for help and being actually like willing to go get help is also, I think, part of the healing process that we're in. But if they don't want to be there or they're not showing up, like at some point, as long as I've done my part to do my best to try and communicate and steward this process to them, then I can let them go and just know like, okay, they can come back and we'll have open arms. Or if there was something I said that didn't resonate, I hope they find someone that does, right? And I think that's an important part for healers, chiropractors to realize, because otherwise we want to take everyone and put them on our back and try and do it for them. And that just leads to two sick people,
Yes. Yes. And I think that even as you're talking about the energy of this, that's sometimes what we do as women, as moms, even daughters and sisters. And I would be curious for any men to chime in on this as well, if that is also something that they feel. I'm only experiencing my current experience here. So, but I think that we do that. And what a relief, like you said, to not take away what someone else is supposed to do. My daughter is 13 and she's had some rough experiences this week. And to figure out what is my role, not to heal her, but to be this person. I think chiropractors are in a role of guide in the process. And, that's where we find ourselves in other roles in life. So how do we guide and steward our children, patients, whatever our role is if we're not a chiropractor. But if we are, I love that thought of loving people and guiding them, but also handing the reins back to them.
Yeah. I mean, definitely isn't easy, that's for sure, right? Like sometimes you want to fix or to help or to do it for them, especially in the people closest to us, right? Where you're like, oh, I don't want you to suffer, or I can see that this is probably not the greatest choice, right? And I think that is really challenging, and you let me know when you get that figured out. But I think the awareness to it is how we can like hold it more loosely, right? I was talking to one of my mentors this morning and I was complaining about my husband's been sick for a few days here, sicker than I've ever seen him, right? And I haven't been the most gracious because, he knows like she's going to call it a man cold. And so he said, you've been mean. And I realized I probably have been mean. And what I said to my friend is she's like, when you look in the mirror, what do you want to see back? You want to see a smile, right? But that means you have to smile, right? And so she was saying, like, you want him to be a certain way. That means you also have to demonstrate it to him, right? And I was like, oh, that was a good thing for me to hear. And, also I realized, like, okay, I actually think he is worse off right now than I thought he was. And so I do need to help give him some TLC and some space to heal up. We can get so in it where I'm like, oh, you're unable to do this and now it falls on me. And then, and you get in this negativity, right? And then just like where it's like these stories we tell ourselves sometimes where we're really only just imbibing our own energy, right? It's all just a reflection back to us. And so she was a good pattern interrupt for me. She was a good adjustment for me today.
Yes.
I'm just where am I not putting out what I would want to receive back? And sometimes I think people get into years of that, right? We get into ruts and years and sometimes decades of things that were like, oh, someone needed to give me a pattern interrupt a long time ago, and I wouldn't have fulfilled the way that it has, right? So,
Yes. Yeah, I experienced that this morning too. My alarm went off at 6, and I opened my phone to join my little breathwork call, and I saw I had a WhatsApp message, and it was like a voice memo, so I couldn't glance at it before breathwork. And I was like, oh, I'm sure that they're saying I did bad on that video. Oh, no, 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 no. I was like, I'll listen to it. And I was like, don't you dare. Don't you dare. Join your breathwork call, do your breathwork, and then listen to it. And what was the message? He was like, Jenna, that last video was amazing. And it is, like you said, getting caught up in our patterns of negativity. Mm-hmm. When I have put out good, why would I presume I'm going to get negative back?
Right. I know.
So even in that pattern interrupt, I felt like I needed to voice out loud. So my husband's going back and forth, getting ready to go to the fire station. I'm like, hey, guess what? That doctor, he liked my video. And my husband's like, cool, very good. Like, he's like, of course it did. Like, what do you think? But it is like, yes, what are we putting out? What are we wanting to have reflected back to us? That's beautiful. Well, I know that we could keep talking for a very long time. I'm going to put some resources, because you have amazing resources for everybody in the show notes. Your book, Reclamation, Evolution of a Hot Mess. All of your coaching links and things as you coach with the Remarkable Practice. Is there any thought that you would like to leave people with today?
I just want to say thank you. You are a bright light for chiropractic, and you shine into so many of us. And I think you are more chiropractic than so many of us actually are. So I just love what you bring out in people by how you show up for both patients and chiropractors. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It is my privilege, my honor, and I'm just constantly delighted by how many wonderful people I meet in chiropractic, where I'm like, these are my people. So thank you for being one of those people.
My pleasure. Thanks, sweetie.